Joseph had raised a question about value deception that Dr. Roberts wanted to comment on. Shall we?
Yeah. See, I think the issue that you bring up is part of an enormously large and difficult one to understand and explain, namely conditions of cognitions of things. Let me give you two examples. You say, I wasn't thinking of this at all. Well, maybe one would fit what you were saying, the other not. So take this. You're raising kids to try to get them to be certain kinds of people and to see things in the world that you want them to see and to believe things that you want them to believe and so on. Now, a common problem raising children is that they have difficulty seeing the difference between justice and revenge. So we had 4 boys. One hits the other, and the other hits him back. And so now I've got to step in and explain this. And so I said, now it's wrong to hit him just because he hit you. He said, but they insist that it was a matter of justice. Why can't I do to him what he did to me? See? And I say, no, there's a difference between justice and revenge. Now that's an extremely difficult thing to teach children about. And I would think a lot of adults cannot see the difference between this. And then when you mix it in the self-defense issue, then it becomes really clouded. So you want them to have certain perceptions of morality, values, and so on. How do you do that? And a lot of it is, just doing the best you can, what you think is going to work or not. Now let's go to a completely different issue, which I've used in class. You might have even heard this. These guys may have heard this. Things can just happen in your mind where you don't see things that are really there. So I don't want to espouse Kant's epistemological view, but I do want to say that there are cognitive conditions. There are conditions required for certain cognitions. Now, the example I use is this. This happened about 10 years ago. I want a coat. I want a certain coat. So I asked my wife, do you know where this coat is? She says, it's in the front closet. So I go to the front closet, I look, I said, it's not there, I don't see it. She says, I'm sure it's there, I saw it there yesterday or something like that. So I go and I look, and I said, okay. So now I go hanger by hanger. Nope, 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 okay. I go back and I say, it's not there, I just checked every coat. She says, I'm sure it's there. She walks to the closet and she pulls it out. Now, all of you have had an experience like this. Why didn't I see it? Or the problem that the students at Rhode Island used to give me. If you claim that it's objectively there, why is it that I don't see it? You claim that there's this aesthetic quality or this moral quality in this action or in this painting. If it's there, why don't I see it? And I say, the problem's in you. But you see, that's an enormously difficult thing to explain. They're raised a certain way with a certain kind of music in a certain kind of house with a certain kind of atmosphere with certain kinds of parents, and then I'm supposed to, in the philosophy class, show them a mosaic of Pinturicchio, and they're supposed to be in awe of this. They didn't have the conditions needed in their upbringing, in what they were exposed to and how they were educated to see what's there, see? So, and in a way, when I left the University of Rhode Island, I was a little cynical that at that point it's difficult to them to see certain things. So I'd use this analogy. They all understood mathematics. Well, in certain equations, those equations are correct. But if it's something in calculus 3 or linear algebra or something like that, not everybody is going to see the connection of one side of the equal sign to the other side of the equal sign. So I said, now, won't you admit it's still there? Yeah. Great mathematicians recognize that it's there? Yeah. Why can't you see it's there? And then they say, well, I can't do that kind of mathematics. And I would try to make the analogy to value perceptions, that It's really there. I'm telling you it's really there. But you don't have the conditions to see it, especially the more subtle ones, see? So I don't know how you deal with that. And I've had brief conversations with Professor Sanford about this. We had 7 kids. One of them is extremely liberal politically. 2 others are extremely conservative politically. But they were all educated in the same way. They grew up in the same house. They all went to the same church. Why does one look at it that way and the other? Or I present a certain view of Hildebrand. It's contrary to what Thomas thinks. I think Hildebrand's completely correct. Dan thinks Thomas is completely correct. Why? We're both Americans. We're both Christians. We're both fairly educated. Why does he see it differently than I see it? And I don't have an answer for that. So it's you see that by the examples that I gave, it's a huge issue. The person that used to talk about this in a very humorous but very truthful way was Bill Mara, who was a student of Hildebrand. And he claimed he taught at Fordham. He said for most of the students there, he couldn't present Hildebrand's views, even though a lot of them were Christian. They just didn't have the background to see what was there. I don't know whether that helps. It's not a solution. But all I can say is just because it's there doesn't mean a person will be able to see it.
And just because they don't see it doesn't mean it's
Is
not
it not
really
there?
Yeah.
The comment that I made to them before is that it's my view that the early phenomenologists, of which Hildebrand was a part, actually expanded the notion of metaphysics, because I would understand the intuition of necessary truths or states or affairs of ideal essences to be a metaphysical project. And so when I taught at St. Anselm College, and there were a lot of good neo-scholastics there, they thought the necessary truths were sort of a few of the things in logic and metaphysics, and then that was it. Law of non-contradiction, the syllogisms, that's where your necessary truths were. And everything else was not necessary truths. It was sort of this philosophical speculation and opinion and so on. But the early phenomenologists, I was giving an example, thought it was a whole range of ideal essences, emotions, values, cognitions, so on, that you could gain necessary truths from with insight. And that's, I think, something you could understand to be metaphysics. Would you understand that to be metaphysics?
I think a discussion partner from the Aristotelian tradition is going to ask you to trace those necessary truths back to some ultimate ground of being. They will claim that they can't stand alone, or that your investigation hasn't come to an end if you formulate these necessary truths, but that some kind of ultimate foundation of them, which leads into rational theology, is needed to fulfill.
That's completely incorrect.
All right. Very well. Well, go ahead and say why it's incorrect.
Well, because the insight simply into the necessary form, the necessary essence.
Yeah.
And that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Now, if you ask, but how are the necessary essences grounded? That's a legitimate question, but a further question.
Yes.
But I don't need to be suspicious or uncertain about my knowledge of a necessary truth that I gleaned from an insight into a necessary essence simply because I can't answer these other questions, or I haven't considered these other questions.
Yeah. Well, how about the value philosophy of Hildebrand and the whole question of a further metaphysical foundation of that one doesn't find very fully developed in
If I have it, look, if I have an insight into the nature of a human person, that all human persons have an innate intrinsic value and dignity and worth, is that a piece of metaphysical knowledge or not? I mean, I would say that it is.
Yeah.
And if you say, yeah, but what's the source of that value? I say, initially I would say, I don't know what you mean. The source of the value is the nature of a human person.
I had made a point, you weren't here for that, that in interpreting value, that there's an aspect of beauty to all Hildebrandian value. I claim that's one of the signature marks of value in his sense. Not that all value is aesthetic value, but that there's a certain radiance of beauty that is part of, and so when Thomas's discussion of good brings out this dimension of beauty, there's a certain kinship. And that's a good point you make, that the interest in beauty is no longer, it's a kind of de-centered awe at the beautiful thing. It doesn't even look like me appropriating something for my perfection. And therefore, the aspect of beauty brings us close to Hildebrandian value. You do, though, have in von Hildebrand this idea that the value / beauty of a thing is rooted in its nature, and the kind of thing that it is, or the kind of action, or the kind of motive that lies in a given stance. That's all the ground and source of whatever value it has. So at least that metaphysical foundation of value is, I think, already quite strongly affirmed in von Hildebrand. It's not as if, as I put it earlier, values just break out erratically and we mysteriously intuit them, but who knows where they come from and why they appear where they do. In von Hildebrand, this rootedness of all value in the kind and nature of the, as he calls it, the bearer of value, is that idea of foundation of good is strong already, I think, in von Hildebrand. Well, you know, the quote that Dennis Kitzinger brought up indicates this theological foundation that von Hildebrand entertained. He didn't think he had to bring that theological foundation into all value discussion, but he did quite acknowledge this divine origin of all finite value. So, but notice that even if you acknowledge that theological dimension, that doesn't necessarily help you resolve particular value disputes. Sometimes people speak as if oh, there's an endless dispute because there's not a big background metaphysics to fall back on. But if you add, well, values reflect God and derive from Him and reflections of Him, that by itself doesn't really help you work through a dispute about the value or disvalue of forgiveness or gratitude or whatever. But in any case, that fuller theological dimension is not missing in von Hildebrand. One could at the most say it needs to be unfolded. It remains at a fairly rudimentary intuitive level, and it could be systematically elaborated more. That's certainly true.
In the end, what they have to have is these important experiences that now open something up to them or change. I knew that happened in the case of one student who came to me and now became a philosophy major because he was on this road, his car flipped over, he was pinned, he was bleeding, he saw his blood bleeding, and he was there 3 hours. And of course he was finally rescued and so on. But now the world's a different place, you see. He realizes he can die, he's finite and so on. And now the philosophical questions are significant, and now he sees things in a different way. And I think that's sort of what is required in a lot of these cases. They have to be presented with something. They have to see St. Peter's in the Sistine Chapel, or they have to have a child. And then all of a sudden, new elements of the world will be open to them. And without that, they're simply going to go through life the way that they are, and they're not going to be experiencing these things. Does that make sense to you?
No, Just so long you don't make it a principle to run over your students to
No,
wake them up.
no, but and it's going to be different experiences for different people, but I think that's sort of what's needed to shake them up, and maybe that's because they weren't given enough when they were growing up, enough of these experiences growing up. So my 17-year-old daughter just returned from Europe. She saw Prague, she saw Salzburg, she saw Vienna. Now that's going to make a difference in her life. And she's going to talk to someone living out in Hopedale, and the girl living out in Hopedale is not going to be able to understand what my daughter is saying because she's got a too narrow sense of experience. You see, it's why I used to say the most important discipline is literature, because if you have the right literature and the right variety, you can be exposed to so many things, so many problems in the world that will help you form your capacity to be sensitive to these things that you otherwise won't be able to recognize. See? So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that what Andrew said was right on target, that there is in Van Hildebrand a certain reception of modernity. What's new in Van Hildebrand is a certain taking serious of questions and contributions of the modern period. And it's not just then a restatement of traditional philosophical ideas in those terms, but it's a reception of issues. This turn to the subject is appropriated in a certain way by Van Hildebrand. And I think that's one fruitful way of thinking about him in relation to the tradition, is that there's through his phenomenological training, he had an experience of modern and contemporary thought, and he doesn't just, in a traditionalist way, reject all that and restore, the 13th century synthesis, but he tries to receive and take seriously impulses that come from modern thought, and that, I think, explains much that's distinctive and new in his thought